history of crime know very well that the Mafia is a Sicilian secret criminal organization, but for the common man, and especially for the journalist who wants a loud headline, the Mafia can be anything. Here, in the African-American gang of Sam Christian from Philadelphia, for its visibility, blatant insolence, and cruelty also received the name Mafia, only Black Mafia. And it must be said that this gang justified its name. Here, you have the influential politicians and fighters for the rights of the black population, and high-profile crimes not leaving the front pages of all American newspapers, and exorbitant bloodshed rightfully made this gang one of the most brutal in U.S. history. So if you're interested in hearing what Sam Christian and his charges did that they are still remembered only in whispers, then meet the Philadelphia Black Mafia on the other side of the law. We will begin our story today with a description of the social and political environment that had developed by the time the Philadelphia Black Mafia was active, for these aspects are very important for a fuller understanding of the story. The mass migration of African Americans from the southern states of the United States to the north began in the 40s of the 20th century. Philadelphia, one of the largest cities in the country, was home to many factories and mills that operated during World War II to fulfill war orders. These factories needed cheap labor, so the influx of immigrants came in handy. The flow of migrant workers remained large even 20 years after the end of the war, although the previous demand for such a large number of unskilled labor was no longer. In the major East Coast cities of New York, Chicago, Detroit, and Philadelphia, factories were closing one after another. This led to a sharp rise in unemployment and crime rates, and the ghetto dwellers were rapidly becoming poorer. The harsh life caused the black population to turn to more radical forms of protest. While protests in the early 1960s were largely peaceful, a decade later, under the influence of nationalist movements, the streets of cities were filled with irreconcilable struggles. The federal government tried to solve this problem. In Philadelphia, there were many public and private programs aimed at alleviating poverty and developing disadvantaged neighborhoods, but the results were not visible. These were not measures that could solve racial tensions. While city officials tried to remedy the situation by raising federal funds, the Philadelphia Police Department relied on more traditional and less expensive methods. In 1964, Philadelphia created a Civil Defense Squad. Its mission was to counter civil disturbances. The Civil Defense Squad also recruited informants and collected information on local political activists. One of the organizations the squad collected information on was the Nation of Islam. This political and religious movement of African Americans was founded in Detroit back in 1930. The Nation of Islam's beliefs were based on the values of traditional Islam, but differed greatly from it. African Americans chose Islam over Christianity for the reason that Christianity was associated with ideas of white supremacy. Islam, in their view, on the contrary, emphasized the equality of believers. The Nation of Islam's reputation in the 1960s was far from ideal. It was accused of extremism and anti-Semitism. The leader of the Nation of Islam, Elijah Muhammad, had urged blacks during World War II to avoid conscription, saying the United States had done nothing for them. He had to serve 4 years in prison for his views. After his release, Elijah began to develop the organization. In his sermons, he called for the creation of a new, separate black nation, calling blacks a new, God-chosen people. By the mid-1960s, the organization had about 500,000 registered members. It's also worth mentioning that another significant member of the Nation of Islam was a man named Malcolm X. He was for a long time the second man in the organization. He will also still appear in our narrative. In Philadelphia, as in many other cities, there was a branch of the Nation of Islam. It was a mosque under the leadership of Jeremiah Shabazz. During hard times for the Nation of Islam, Shabazz spent a lot of time preaching and recruiting new members. He was rumored to be the one who got boxer Cassius Clay, better known as Muhammad Ali, interested in his ideas. Shabazz had many connections in the Philadelphia underworld as well, and one of his followers was Samuel Christian, one of our main characters today. Samuel Christian had his first run-in with the law in 1959 when he was 14 years old. He was arrested for armed robbery along with 3 other teenagers. By the age of 20, Christian had time to add several arrests to his record for participating in illegal gambling. According to the memories of his contemporaries, he was a man of powerful physique, under 6 feet tall, weighing 220 pounds. Such guys were often called thick-necked bullies. Christian stood out even against them. Robbery, aggravated assault, and illegal carrying of weapons were just a partial list of his offenses by the time he was 20 years old. At 25, Christian almost ended up in prison. Together with 2 accomplices, he decided to rob his acquaintances who had gathered to play cards. It was not the first time Christian chose people he knew personally as victims. All the participants in the robbery wore stockings over their heads to conceal their identity. However, things did not go according to plan during this robbery. First, a scuffle ensued, during which Christian's stocking was pulled off, and then gunfire broke out, killing one of the players. Subsequently, 3 of the victims were able to identify Christian as one of the participants in the robbery, but he was lucky to escape punishment. The case was dropped because the victims were afraid to testify against him. Sam's brutality was legendary. One detective from Philadelphia later described Sam as follows: "If you see him on the street, then immediately pull out your gun. If he sees you and even suspects that you are going to arrest him, he will shoot you first." Sam tried to gather around him the same most ferocious and embittered scumbags capable of terrorizing anyone. Researchers believe that the gang, later called by journalists Philadelphia Black Mafia, was founded by Samuel Christian no earlier than September 1968. The exact number of its members at the dawn of the organization is unknown, but the names of all its leaders are known. The leadership of the Black Mafia in 1968 consisted of 14 people. These were relatively young people, the average age of which was 29 years old. Virtually all of them by then already had an impressive list of arrests, most of which involved violence. The very first documented crime committed by the Black Mafia is believed to be a murder that took place on April 19th, 1969. On that day, Nathaniel Williams, nicknamed Rock and Roll, one of the founders of the group, invited some acquaintances from the Black Mafia to play dice. He himself did not play and left. However, half an hour later, several armed men burst into the room where the game was held. Threatening with weapons, they forced the players to give them all the money and valuables. To the leaders of the Black Mafia quickly reached the rumors that the organizer of this audacious robbery is Williams himself. One of the witnesses told Sam Christian that he saw Williams driving the car that drove the raiders away from the scene of the robbery. Sam deemed this sufficient evidence, and that same day, 2 hours after the robbery, several eyewitnesses witnessed Williams being forcibly removed from a bar on 15th Avenue. The next day, his body, bearing the marks of 4 bullet wounds, was found in a Philadelphia suburb. The murder was characterized by local police as a Black Mafia execution. The police were even able to arrest one of the suspects, Sam's sidekick, Jerome Barnes. But due to a lack of evidence and no witnesses who would agree to identify him, all charges were dropped against him. In May of that year, a member of the Black Mafia, Richard James, beat up a City Hall official, David Truly. Truly was about to appear as a witness in a major fraud trial. The Black Mafia was hired to deal with him. An unknown man called Truly at home and told him he had documents that might be of interest to him. Intrigued, Truly arrived late at night on the outskirts of town, where he was met by several dark-skinned boys, James among them. Having ascertained that the official was before them, they informed him that the documents would soon be brought by a mutual friend of theirs, and in the meantime offered to walk to the meeting place. Truly refused, whereupon they immediately began to beat him. Before he lost consciousness, he managed to scream. His scream attracted the attention of a passerby who scared the attackers away. Thanks to him, David Truly survived. Richard James was arrested 6 months after the incident in New York, where he had gone, according to police reports, to carry out a contract killing. However, James never had time to testify. On February 21st, 1971, he was found dead in his prison cell. The cause of death was an overdose of heroin. Apparently, his death was staged by members of the Black Mafia, who feared that James would talk during interrogations. In those days, the Black Mafia operated only in the African-American neighborhoods of Philadelphia. The circle of its interests at first consisted only of robbery and extortion. The victims of the group were black businessmen who were not always in good relations with the law. Occasionally, as in the case of David Truly, the group was involved in contract killings or intimidation. However, Sam Christian realized that such a path would never lead his team to big money. The gang could not yet afford to deal in drugs because they lacked the necessary amount of money to buy the goods. And then they decided to engage in extortion on a broader spectrum, terrorizing legitimate businesses as well, not as before entrepreneurs operating in the black or gray economic zone. In order to make money from extortion, the gang needed a reputation for being really badass guys who would stop at nothing to intimidate their victims. Earning that reputation is what the guys set about doing. On several occasions, in 1969 and 1970, Sam Christian and his associates, in broad daylight, shot up the windows of bars whose owners did not want to share their profits with him. On September 21st, 1970, several members of the Black Mafia broke into a bar where they shot and killed the bartender and took $250 from the cash register. The incident occurred in the evening, and there were customers in the bar, but no charges were filed because none of the witnesses agreed to cooperate with the police. The reputation of the group grew rapidly. Gradually, Sam Christian, in addition to extorting businesses en masse, cracked down on all the local small gangs. However, in early 1970, the Black Mafia faced such a competitor to fight with which she was not yet able to. This was a group of black Muslims who were affiliated with Temple Number 12, one of the divisions of the Nation of Islam. By the late 1960s, the number of black Muslims in Philadelphia was about 10,000. It is not possible to determine how many of them were members of the Nation of Islam. What can be accurately said is that in 1969, the criminal wing of the Philadelphia branch of the Nation of Islam far outnumbered the nascent Black Mafia, both in number of members and weapons. A confrontation between the two groups seemed inevitable, as did the defeat of the Black Mafia. Therefore, faced with the prospect of a war for spheres of influence, Sam Christian decided to make the Black Mafia from the Black Mafia Squad Temple Number 12. In addition, many members of the Black Mafia professed Islam and were members of the mosque. Sam converted to Islam back in the mid-1960s, being impressed by the sermons of Elijah Muhammad. Now, after the merger of the two groups, he reported directly to its leader, Jeremiah Shabazz. Some members of the Black Mafia then decided not to embrace Islam. However, they continued their work under Sam's protection, but now had to pay a higher percentage of their profits as tax. The alliance with the Nation of Islam opened new horizons for the Black Mafia. From now on, its members did not need to worry about their safety. If the victims had previously tried not to testify against members of the Black Mafia, now they would not. The top leadership of the Black Mafia at first was unhappy that part of their profits will have to share with the temple. It was about $4,000 a month, but quickly realized that for this small amount, acquired much more. Black Mafia has become a serious political problem for local authorities. Whereas before, the Black Mafia was simply a gang of black men, now it could exploit the theme of race and religion. And Sam's lawyers did not fail to take advantage of this. There was a case when two defendants in the same case were able to appeal the verdict on the grounds that it was based on racial and religious prejudice. Now, any unremarkable case of robbery and extortion involving a member of the Black Mafia took on serious overtones. Another unobvious advantage of the merger was the ability of black Muslims to hide unwanted criminals in their mosques. Local authorities tried to avoid any conflict situations with the Nation of Islam and tried not to disturb it unnecessarily. The Black Mafia also had the opportunity to recruit new recruits from among the prisoners. In many prisons in the northeastern part of the United States, a large number of black Muslims were serving their sentences. They were a large and cohesive force, and the Black Mafia was expanding its ranks at the expense of some of them, then making money right in prison. Many young prisoners joined their prison gangs for protection from other prisoners. This protection was not free, and it was paid for with money. The Black Mafia also exploited those businesses owned by the Nation of Islam in Philadelphia. Since none of the members of the Black Mafia had official jobs, they took fictitious jobs at firms owned by Temple Number 12. Having secured such an influential support, the gang decided that now it cannot look back on the law. And shortly after merging with the Nation of Islam, Black Mafia committed one of the most notorious crimes in the history of Philadelphia. On January 4th, 1971, 8 members of the group, led by Nudie Mims, robbed a furniture store. The fact of the robbery itself is not surprising, which is not the case with the brutality with which the robbery was committed. Although none of the 20 people in the store at the time of the robbery offered any resistance, all present were brutally beaten, and 2 were shot. Mims personally doused the bodies of those shot with gasoline and then set them on fire. The Sam gang's loot was $3,000. Such a small amount of money forced law enforcement to look at another reason for such a brutal robbery. The management of the store repeatedly received from the Black Mafia demands of payment for protection, but refused to pay. Mims would later be sentenced to life in prison for his part in the crime. A month after the furniture store robbery, a couple weeks apart, gang members robbed two banks. The robbery scheme in both cases was roughly the same. Threatening with guns, they ordered all bank employees to remove their clothes and then beat them up. These two robberies enriched the Black Mafia by $12,000. On September 6, 1971, 7 members of the Black Mafia, led, this time by the gang's founder, Sam Christian, robbed the Adelphia bar in Atlantic City. There were 25 customers in the bar at the time of the robbery, but that didn't stop the attackers. All of the patrons were tied up and the manager was beaten. The proceeds amounted to $14.5 thousand. Gradually, information about these and other Black Mafia crimes became public. In the spring of 1971, a reporter was interviewing an inmate in prison about drug use, and the inmate mentioned the Black Mafia. The reporter interrogated the inmate as to exactly what he meant. The inmate, clearly nervous about accidentally mentioning such important people, told the reporter that the Black Mafia was rumored to be a gang of badass killers who had controlled the entire drug trade in the local ghetto for the past 5 years. Another former drug addict, in an interview, said that he had to deal with those dealers who had been taxed by the Black Mafia. According to him, those dealers who were not able to pay Sam the right amount of money right away usually got a second chance. The dealer would get even more product to sell in a shorter period of time. If the dealer did not manage to collect the required amount of money, he was killed. From the very beginning, the members of the group thought about getting involved in selling drugs. At first, the only thing that stopped them was the lack of money. However, over time, as the Black Mafia grew in power, it managed to take control of many street drug dealers. In those years, the most popular drug in Philadelphia's black neighborhoods was heroin. Most of the heroin in Philadelphia was shipped through New York, through channels that Frank Matthews had established. While at home in New York, he sold heroin through a network of his own dealers. He operated differently in other cities. He sold the product in bulk to local dealers who sold it themselves. In Philadelphia, Frank Matthews cooperated with Tyrone Palmer. However, on April 2, 1972, Palmer was murdered by members of the Black Mafia. He was shot and killed in front of a huge crowd at the Harlem nightclub in Atlantic City. This club, where Frank Sinatra himself once liked to have breakfast, became the scene of a real massacre. During the shootout, in addition to Palmer, was killed one of his bodyguards and 3 women who accompanied the drug dealer. About 20 people were injured during the indiscriminate shooting and the ensuing panic. Almost all members of the Black Mafia, including Sam Christian, were able to leave the club, but almost all of them were soon apprehended by police officers. Only Sam Christian was able to leave Atlantic City. He managed to make his way to Chicago, where he found refuge in the mosques of the Nation of Islam. Palmer's murder was a signal to Matthews, a warning that he must share with the Black Mafia the income he had earned in its territory. Matthews did not immediately take the hint, and so Sam's men had to take out 3 more drug dealers connected to him. Only after this string of murders did Matthews agree to pay 10% of money he earned in Philadelphia. As for the investigation of the murders, it ended the same way as many other Black Mafia cases. All charges were dropped, as the victims and witnesses categorically refused to appear in court and testify. Part of the murdered Tyrone Palmer's place was taken by Benjamin Major Coxon. Coxon can rightfully be considered one of the most colorful figures, not only of Philadelphia, but of the entire American underworld. Businessman, civil rights activist, owner of one of the biggest nightclubs in Philadelphia, who could boast of friendship with such a man as the great boxer Muhammad Ali. Suffice it to say that after one of his victories, Muhammad Ali said on live television that he was dedicating it to his friend, the next mayor of Camden, New Jersey, Mayor Coxon. In 1972, Coxon did run for mayor of Camden, a small town in suburban Philadelphia, but failed. Coxon quickly realized that it was better to maintain good relations with the Black Mafia. For his part, he provided the gang with many connections in the drug trade and helped launder money. Together with the Black Mafia, Major registered several companies and also gave a lot of advice on what kind of financial fraud is more profitable to engage in. It was on Coxon's advice that the gang developed a fraudulent scheme involving a shell company called Pyramid Enterprises, Inc. It was perhaps one of the few Black Mafia cases that did not involve bloodshed. The essence of the scam involved credit card applications made in the fictitious names of employees of a firm that never existed. The credit card companies obtained 2 phone numbers for the firm, calls to which were forwarded to a fake pyramid employee. When bank employees called the firm to verify that the applicant was an employee, they were given all of the information. Meanwhile, several organizations, including DEA, were tracking Frank Matthews' activities. On January 5th, 1973, he was arrested in Las Vegas. Matthews was indicted on a number of charges related to the possession and distribution of over $1.5 million worth of narcotics. Around the same time, the Internal Revenue Service came after Matthews. It filed a lawsuit against Matthews to recover $7 million. Matthews could be behind bars for 50 years. The amount of bail in his case was about $5 million, but the lawyers managed to reduce it to $100,000. After that bail was posted, Matthews was released from jail. Since then, he has never been seen again. There were rumors that he had hidden $20 million in a safe place and then took it and fled the country. In any case, Matthews disappeared without a trace. With his departure, the Black Mafia lost a significant amount of profits. In addition, with Matthews gone, there was a fully operational network of distributors to whom Matthews had supplied the product. And it was without the product. The Black Mafia decided to take advantage of that. That's where Coxon came in. Thanks to his connections, he was able to find a supplier from New York, rumored to be connected to the Gambino family. He began to deliver the goods from New York to Philadelphia, and the Black Mafia sold it through a network of dealers from whom previously extorted money and now forced to work for themselves. In January 1973, the activities of the Black Mafia drew increased attention not only from law enforcement, but also from the federal media. If previously only residents of Philadelphia and the suburbs knew about the Black Mafia, after the commission of this monstrously brutal murder, its popularity reached a new level. In the mid-50s, a young man named Ernest Timothy McGee joined the Nation of Islam. Through his oratorical skills, McGee was able to attract the attention of Nation of Islam leaders, including Malcolm X and Elijah Muhammad. They were impressed with his abilities and began to promote his career within the ranks of the organization. However, he soon fell into disgrace. His beliefs were at odds with the policies the organization sought to implement. After one particular heated argument with Elijah, Ernest McGee moved to New York City, where he converted to the Sunni branch of Islam and opened a Hanafi center in Harlem. He also changed his name. His name was now Hamas Abdul Khalis, and began to develop his movement. By the end of 1972, Khalis's movement had about 1,000 members. Khalis decided that the moment had come when he could confront his former comrades in the Nation of Islam in an ideological dispute. He wrote a letter of denunciation and sent it to 57 Nation of Islam mosques across the country. In this letter, Khalis denounced black Muslims and Elijah Muhammad, calling him a false prophet and a lying deceiver. A few days later, Khalis sent another letter accusing Elijah of duping and deceiving people, robbing them of their money, and furthermore condemning them to a road of hell, and urging congregants to leave the sect. The mosque in Philadelphia also received its copy of the letter. A few days later, a meeting of Black Mafia leaders was called, at which it was decided to kill Khalis. On January 12, 1973, several members of the Black Mafia traveled to Washington, D.C., where Khalis had a 3-story house for reconnaissance. They were satisfied with the results of their reconnaissance. There were no guards outside the house. The house itself was located on a street corner, and a busy highway ran next to it. On the morning of January 17th, John Clark, a Black Mafia hitman, called Sam Christian and uttered the code phrase, "Bring your shoes." This was the signal to send an armed team to Washington. The 7 Black Mafia operatives acted on a prearranged plan. John Clark called Khalis's home and introduced himself as Tommy Jones and inquired about the possibility of purchasing some religious pamphlets. The phone was answered not by Khalis himself, but by his 22-year-old daughter, Amina, who, not sensing a trick, replied that the pamphlets were in stock and could be picked up in the afternoon, around 2 o'clock in the afternoon. At the appointed time, the whole gang drove up to Khalis's mansion in 2 cars. 2 of the gang members knocked on the door. Khalis's daughter Amina, who was lucky enough to survive the massacre, later recalled that she looked out the window and saw 2 well-dressed guys in the courtyard. She noticed that they each had a cigarette behind their ear, which she thought was highly unusual for Muslims. Amina did not open the door herself because according to Hanafi religious principles, a woman should not open the door to strangers. The door was opened by her brother, Daoud, leaving it on a chain. The visitors asked for a single pamphlet and handed Daoud an amount exceeding its value by $1. Daoud excused himself briefly to a room to fetch the change. As he was about to hand it over, a gun was held to his head. John Clark told Daoud to open the door and step away from it. Once inside the room, one of the Black Mafia operatives yelled that it was a robbery. The bandits gathered all of the adult occupants of the house into the living room, where they laid them face down on the floor before tying everyone's hands and feet. Clark loudly asked those present if anyone else was in the house, to which he was told that there were 3 children on the upper floors. Clark ordered his men to find all the people in the house. As they searched, the bandits simultaneously went through their belongings looking for anything of value. Clark asked Daoud and Amina where they were hiding the money. He was convinced that such a wealthy house was bound to have a huge stash of money. When they told him that there was no stash and that the money was only enough for small expenses, he ordered all the hostages to be taken to the basement. One of the attackers told Clark that he had noticed a safe in the bedroom. When Daoud gave Clark the key, it turned out that the safe was empty. An enraged Clark took Daoud to a prayer room, forced him on his knees, and then shot him 3 times in the head. After disposing of Daoud, Clark asked Amina why her father had written those letters. Amina replied that she had never meddled in her father's affairs. Clark took her to the 3rd floor and ordered her to kneel down and shot her. Incredibly, the girl managed to survive. Lying on the floor, she witnessed one of Clark's accomplices massacre her younger brother. At that moment, one of the accomplices noted that Amina was breathing. He shot her twice more in the head. Amina experienced terrible pain, but managed to survive. The thing is that the bullets used by the militants were old. When the bullets hit Amina's head, they flattened. Despite being shot 3 times in the head, she not only survived, but did not even lose consciousness. At the same moment, another person suddenly entered the house. It was a friend of Khalas's family, Abdul Noor. Abdul met Khalas's wife, who had forgotten her wallet at home, not far from the house, near the local supermarket. Abdul agreed to make a quick trip to her house and bring it back. When he drove to the Khalas's house, he did not notice anything strange. After Noor opened the door, 3 Black Mafia operatives jumped on him, tied him up, and gagged him. He was then taken to the 3rd floor, where he was killed by 2 gunshots. That left the children. One of the gang members, James Price, reasonably remarked that he thought it was unnecessary to kill the younger ones because they were too young to recognize the attackers. According to survivor Amina's recollection, he also uttered a phrase, the meaning of which was that he had only signed up to rob Hamas's house and possibly kill him, but not to massacre him. The other assailant, later identified as Ronald Harvey, replied to him that they too should die because they were the scions of a hypocrite. Everyone in the house at the time of the attack was killed, except for Amina, who was seriously wounded. However, the main target of the attackers, Khalas himself, was not among them. The assassins decided to wait for him as well. Khalas's wife, Haja, was outside the supermarket waiting for Abdul Noor to bring her her purse. The journey from the supermarket to her house took no more than 10 minutes. Haja called home from a payphone, but no one answered. The worried woman went to the coffee shop where Khalas was staying and told him that no one was answering the phone at home. The couple drove Khalas's car to their house, near which they saw Abdul Noor's car parked. The front door to their house was locked. Haja knocked loudly on the door and saw the face of an unfamiliar man in a neighboring window. Khalas loudly asked who it was, in response to which Ron Harvey shouted, "It's Tommy." At that moment, Khalas realized that something terrible had happened. He yelled to his wife to immediately go to the neighbors and call the police. He then went to the front door, which at that moment opened. Ron Harvey attempted to pull Khalas inside, but the man, being a rather strong man, managed to break free and run away from his house. Ron Harvey ran after him, but realized that he would only attract the attention of passersby. So he turned around and ran to the back door. The other accomplices in the attack at that point thought that Khalas had brought police officers into the house and fled. Khalas managed to jump into his car, hoping that he could catch up with at least one of the criminals. However, he soon lost sight of them and drove back to his house. All of the attackers were able to leave Washington unharmed. The Black Mafia had completely failed. Khalas survived. The assailants themselves left a mass of crucial evidence against themselves at the crime scene. The financial gain was negligible. The criminals were only able to find $1,000 at Khalas's home. They donated $2,000 to the temple and divided the remaining $800 among themselves. The result of this unprecedented in its brutality murder was the death of 7 people. It shook the entire United States. The reaction of Nation of Islam officials to it was interesting. Jeremiah Shabazz, when asked by reporters whether the attackers were really members of Temple 12, said that he did not want to answer that question because journalists would write that the attackers were black Muslims. Another Nation of Islam leader, Louis Farrakhan, went even further, saying the crime was the work of FBI agents trying to discredit his movement. A grief-stricken Callis blamed the Nation of Islam for the crime in each of his many interviews. Even boxer Muhammad Ali, whom Callis accused of funding black Muslims, got in trouble. The boxer had to issue a special address to the press in which he categorically denied the involvement of the Nation of Islam in the crime. Law enforcement authorities thought otherwise. Near the scene of the crime, police found a suitcase containing a .38 caliber handgun, a copy of the Philadelphia Daily News, several credit cards that belonged to a man named Willie Horton, and a pay stub in the name of John Clark. It turned out that the gun belonged to a member of the Philadelphia chapter of the Nation of Islam, and the credit cards belonged to a man who had been robbed by members of the Black Mafia a few months earlier. The same credit card was used by criminals to pay for a hotel room where the gang stayed the night before the murder. As a result, everyone involved in the attack was arrested. Despite the abundance of circumstantial evidence, the most valuable testimony came from one of the participants in the attack, James Price. On June 7th, 1973, Amina Khalif identified him as one of the participants in the January 1973 attack. In addition to being charged with this crime, Price was also charged with several crimes in Philadelphia. Eager to save himself from the death penalty, Price agreed to cooperate with law enforcement. Price confessed to the crime on July 3, 1973. FBI agents obtained a 45-page confession in which Price outlined all the circumstances of the crime in Washington. The other participants in the crime were indicted on August 15th of that year. The court announced the verdict in this case in 1974. 4 of the 7 assailants were sentenced to life imprisonment. James Price actively cooperated with the investigation and could count on a lesser term. But in the fall of 1974, he was killed in prison. Only one participant in the attack, Jerome Sinclair, was able to escape punishment. The court acquitted him due to a lack of evidence. Hallis was outraged by the judge's verdict. He had expected all the killers to be sentenced to death. He was so hungry for justice that a few years later, in March 1977, he led an armed Hanafi group that took over a government building in downtown Washington, D.C. He was so eager for justice that he led an armed group of Hanafis to take over the government building. For 2 days, the group held about 150 people hostage. Callis demanded that his family's murderers be extradited to him, as well as those involved in the assassination of preacher Malcolm X. None of these demands were met. 39 hours after the building was seized, the hostages were released. Hamas Callis was sentenced to 40 years in prison. He never got what he thought was a fair sentence for the killers and died in prison in 2003. But let's go back for a bit. In the spring of 1973, the Black Mafia was at the height of its power. The fact that after the massacre in Washington, the group was under the scrutiny of the authorities did not bother Sam Christian. He was confident in his own impunity. The fame of the gang in the criminal world has reached such heights that it even had imitators. With them, however, the gang members were not particularly ceremonious and killed. All criminal enterprises of Black Mafia were thought out. Jeremiah Shabazz provided the gang with Nation of Islam mosques across the country as safe houses, meeting places, and warehouses. And Coxon provided Sam Christian with connections in the underworld that he could never have dreamed of before. Coxon played a vital role in making deals, was the organizer of many financial scams. Coxon did not take into account only one thing. After he brought Sam Christian with useful to him people, he ceased to be necessary to him. And soon, the Black Mafia had a reason to eliminate his former accomplice, who knew too much.
Relentless, ultimate competitors, fighting for injured workers' rights, and Sterling Cohen.
Alright, y'all, let's get into this other video. Alright, Philadelphia. Let's see. That was the Black Mafia. Let's get into the JBM. Junior
And the
Black
two
Mafia.
would form a bond,
Gonna get
and
into
Black
that.
Sam would take Bucky under his wing, and the two would form a bond.
See my dreams unfold, nightmares come true. It was time to marry the game, and I said, yeah, I do. If you want it, you gotta see it with a clear eye view.
This crack house on 21st Street in North Philadelphia is closed now after two young people were executed in the doorway by a gunman yesterday.
Crack houses within every other block in the neighborhood.
$2 billion drug bill is aimed at punishing big-time drug dealers and casual drug users.
Today, there's a new epidemic. Smokable cocaine, otherwise known as crack.
The investigation begins in Philadelphia, then moves to Camden, Elizabeth, New Jersey, and
Who brought the
finally
crack to the
Brooklyn, New York.
neighborhoods?
The seizure was captured by federal drug agents on this undercover videotape. Lawmen seized more than 1,000 pounds of cocaine with an estimated street value of $250 million.
Leroy Bucky Davis was born on June 9th, 1967, to his mother, Erie Davis, and his father, Leroy Davis Sr. He came from a close-knit family, but in the 1970s, his dad had started to suffer from mental health issues, and things got so bad that his mom was forced to move back in with her parents, Marie and Marvin Harrison. They lived on the 1300 block of Paxton Street in Southwest Philly, and everybody in the neighborhood called his grandmother Mama because the community was so close-knit. Even in Bucky's own home with his grandmother, it wasn't uncommon to see aunts and uncles and cousins always there, always having that family atmosphere, and what they lacked in money, they made up for in love. But Bucky would find an outlet and a way out of poverty because in 1974, he would be introduced to a man by the name of Dick Turner, and he was a boxing trainer at the Southwest Philadelphia Youth Center, and he saw the promise that a young Bucky had, and he began to train with him. And it was very clear early on that a young Bucky had the potential to be one of the greats. He looked up to Mr. Turner's nephew, a man by the name of Anthony Two Guns Fletcher, who had a very flashy style. And that was right up Buck's alley. He loved to put on a show, so he would often try to imitate Two Guns. He would enter into local boxing tournaments, Junior Olympics, and travel the amateur boxing circuit, making a name for himself. And eventually, in 1985, he was selected to be a part of the United States boxing team. He would go to Dublin, Ireland, to face their national boxing team, and Buck would dominate the flyweight division. According to his boys, he was always calling back home like, yo, I just dropped a bull. Yo, I just dropped another bull in 30 seconds. He won his division, and Buck's path was clear. He could become one of the boxing greats. This was a time of people such as Tommy Hearns, Marvelous Marvin Hagler, Sugar Ray Leonard, and young Buck. He had all of the skills to be one of those people. He just had to keep putting in that work. And his boxing coach, Mr. Turner, would always tell Buck, son, please don't blow this gift that God gave you. Please don't blow it. But Buck's life would change when him and his high school sweetheart had a son when Buck was only 16 years old. His son was named Lamar, and that very same year of that child being born, he had another son with another ex-girlfriend, and his son's name was Fontel. Now with the pressure of being a teenage father, Buck, he needed money, and he needed it now. So Bucky, he would take to the streets of Philly looking for a way to make a dollar. He got into gambling. He loved pool and he loved dice. And this is when he would get his nickname, Lucky Bucky, because he would come in the dice game and pretty much take all the cash. And one day, Buck had won that dice, but the person he beat, they didn't want to pay him in cash, so they paid a young Bucky in coke. And this is what introduced him to the drug game. He began to hustle on 52nd and Chester with his homie Outlaw, but this was still kind of lowbrow hustling. They wasn't getting a lot of money, and Buck, he would still do a lot of gambling on the side. But Lucky Bucky's luck was about to run out because one day at a high-stakes crap game, it was found out that Bucky had been using trick dice, and the person who was running the house, he was about to kill Buck, flat out. But a man in the room raised his voice, and that man was named Black Sam, also known as Magic. And he vouched for the young boy that he knew him from around the way, and he saved Bucky's life, and the two would form a bond, and Black Sam would take Bucky under his wing, showing him different parts of the drug game, and also introducing him to the JBM, the Junior Black Mafia, an extension of the Black Mafia family that ruled the city of Philadelphia throughout the late 60s and the 70s, created by Samuel Christian in 1968. They had a reputation for extortion, kidnapping, armed robbery, and multiple murders.
There were up to 900 people in the Club Harlem that night. Sam Christian and other Black Mafia members basically go in and basically commit a mass shooting. They go in and start opening fire. They kill Tyrone Palmer. They kill a few of his bodyguards, and they kill 3 women and injure 20 people.
They committed many infamous acts throughout the 70s, but as some of the members began to either die or go to prison or go on a run, it left a void in the streets of Philadelphia, and that void would be filled by the JBM, created in early 1986 by Aaron Jones and James Cole. And Aaron Jones was actually groomed by Black Mafia hitman Robert Nudie Mims. The JBM was created under the idea of recruiting different independent dealers throughout the city and getting them all under one flag of the JBM. And Bucky, he repped it to the fullest, and he was getting more money than he had ever seen. He worked under his mentor, Black Sam, as a distributor and as a top manager. But Buck was finna rise even more after one of the top bosses, Aaron Jones, took a liking to him and wanted to groom Bucky. He approached Black Sam and told him, hey, I'm gonna take him up under my wing and I'm gonna take him to the next level. Buck would be promoted from manager and distributor to a squad boss, which meant he now had a seat at the JBM table with the head honchos, and he brought his guys along with him. He had a crew of day one homies: Liddell Johnson, Will Quiet Storm Purdue, James Littles Morton, Melvin D. Davis, Manny Mason, Suge, Lefty, all of the guys. They had a spot that was between Greenway and Woodland Avenue on 58th Street, and they would work in 8-hour shifts. And it wasn't uncommon to collect $30,000 in just one shift. And this went on 7 days a week for years. Despite Bucky's small stature, he was a leader of men. He made you feel like you was the only person that could move that pack, that could move that work. And a lot of the people who was up under him, when he got him in the kitchen, they seen nothing but Pyrex vision. Bucky and his Southwest crew, they was getting it, along with the entire JBM. But somebody would come into their life that would change the dynamics of his team. Rodney Frog Carson, who was known from around the way as being a basketball player, but he joined the Navy and he started to come back home to visit. And while he would be home, he would see Bucky and his crew, guys around his same age, getting major money, money that he would never see in the military, and he wanted that life. He wanted that fast money. So one day, he approached Bucky and asked him what could he do to get down. And Bucky, he needed to get a spot. And since he was a street dude, it was kind of hard to get an apartment in his name. So he used Frog as a front man. And this is what got him on. And he wasn't just a front man, he would rise up. And after going AWOL from the military, Frog would become Buck's second in command. They got 2 matching BMWs, and they got a lavish spot out in Penrose, an exclusive suburb in Philadelphia. But a lot of Buck's day one homies didn't really see why Frog rose up the ranks so fast. He wasn't in the trenches with him growing up, so they just didn't understand how he got so much power without being there from day one. But Bucky, he was the leader. He explained it to him the best that he could, but when you was getting money like they was getting it, it was hard to argue anyways. Jeeps, Beamers, convertible Saabs, whatever the newest whips was, the JBM was in it, along with custom-made jewelry with the letters JBM encrusted in diamonds. But JBM just didn't stand for Junior Black Mafia. It said that it also stood for just blowing money, and it wasn't just a street gang, it was a lifestyle.
It wasn't just rings. I mean, people was putting it on cars. You know what I mean? It was a lifestyle. A ring was just the icing on the cake, but it was just a lifestyle. JBM was a lifestyle. You know what I mean? People say Junior Black Mafia, but you know what I mean? Another take on that was just blowing money. And they was blowing money, and they had blow and money.
And a lot of the members would get JBM on their license plates, but Buck, he would switch it up. He got serving well on his license plate because he was definitely serving well, getting a lot of money, taking care of his family, and trying to give back. There are stories from people that were kids growing up in Southwest Philly during Buck's heyday, saying that they would go to the local fashion store and run up a tab under Buck's name and just tell the store owner, yo, Buck said we can come in here and get some stuff, and just put it on his tab. And when Buck would come in, the store owner would give him the tab like, yo, these kids came in here and ran it up. And Buck would be like, yo, what? But he would go ahead and pay for it. He was just a giving type of guy. But whatever he gave, Bucky and the JBM definitely took from the community as well, because crack was a superpower, and it severely damaged the black community. It changed the way people had to live their lives in the streets of Philadelphia. It kept kids from being able to play outside. But despite the destruction that was going on around them, the JBM was too busy counting money. And one of the leaders, Aaron Jones and Bucky, they were real close. Front row seats at premier boxing matches, all the celebrities coming to check in with Bucky when they come to Philly. People like Bobby Brown, Eazy-E, amongst others. He knew how to move amongst the bosses. Bucky was a superstar in Southwest Philly, and his status had become legendary. The story about rappers from back in that time by the name of Cool C and Steady B, who kind of had a rap buzz, and they were popular, especially in Philly, and they were shooting a music video, and everybody was surrounding them because, you know, they rap stars. But Bucky, he pulled up in a cherry red Volvo, hopped out, and everybody left from Cool C and Steady B and ran over to Bucky like, yo, there go the bull. He was that guy. Bucky was not only popular around Southwest for his time as a boxer and competing for the United States boxing team, now he was growing a legendary status in the streets. And the JBM would continue to rise as well and expand. And once they got major dudes from around the city to join their team, they would be unstoppable. They got Brian Moochie Thornton, who ran the Richard Allen projects, Kevin Bowman, who was strong in North Philly, Larry Brown and Reginald Reeves were making plays all over West Philly, and Mark Casey was a major player uptown. And with the team now strong as ever, the JBM's profits would skyrocket, especially after they got their new connect by the name of Earl Stewart, aka Mustafa, the plug. Hundreds of keys every week, millions of dollars. The JBM loved the nightlife. They hit up clubs such as the Plateau, where they could shine, showing everybody that we them boys out here getting that money. All of the ladies wanted to be with them, and the fellas, they wanted to be down. Now, in their first few years of existence, the JBM was getting money in silence. It wasn't too much noise around their name when it came to law enforcement. But as they went to expand, they started to have beefs around the city, and this led to one of the leaders, James Cole, to step down. He was a little older, he had a different mindset, and he knew violence would bring the police, which would ultimately bring problems.
They were low-key for the first couple years, and then as they grew and there was more cocaine brought into the organization, there was many more fights, many more gunfights, and there was just this trail of bodies.
So he gave it all to Aaron Jones and put him in touch with his plug, Mustafa. Now, Aaron Jones had absolute power in the JBM, and whenever members of the crew would meet up, they would greet each other with a big hug, followed by the words, family. JBM was as strong as ever. The money was coming in, the girls was there, cars was there, life was good, but a war was on the horizon from a threat coming from abroad, from Jamaica, when Vivian Blake and the Jamaican Shower Posse came to town.
In late 1984, 5 people are executed in a Miami crack house. One, a pregnant woman, is found in a praying position as if pleading for her life. Investigators charged this slaughter was the handiwork of Jamaican posses that killed 1,400 people around the nation during the 4-year investigation. Among arrests that began yesterday were 34 members of the Miami-based Shower Posse, so named because they rained bullets on their enemies.
These people are absolutely the most vicious organized crime group in the United States today.
It was started in Tivoli Gardens in Jamaica by Lester Lloyd Coke, aka Jim Brown, the Don of Dons, a Jamaican drug lord who ruled the Garrison community in West Kingston. And the Jamaican Shower Posse had a very fierce reputation, especially when it came to murder. Their name comes from the fact that they would shower their enemies in bullets when they were at war. The Shower Posse was strong in places like New York City, New Jersey, Florida, and now they had their sights set on the city of Philadelphia. The Shower Posse would come in with force and was able to establish itself in the Philadelphia drug trade, but the JBM, they weren't finna go for it. And the war was on, and it was a very bloody and violent battle. The Shower Posse stood tall for as long as it could, but according to JBM members, once they was really able to come up with a plan, the Shower Posse just couldn't handle the pressure, and they was able to run them up out of the city.
No, we didn't like them shooting them young guys and taking them out the airports and then running back to Jamaica. He wasn't feeling that. So them came through and cleaned that shit up like, man, y'all ain't fuck from around here. Most of them dudes that Shower Posse and shit, niggas was coming up from New York. So when they came down with that shit, they got it in for low, man. But then when the M got it all, formed it all up, you know, them niggas had to roll. That was where it went. They got the fuck out of there. It went to war a little bit, but they couldn't stand the pressure.
A staggering 27 people were murdered during this bloody turf war. But it wasn't just threats from out of town that Bucky and the JBM had to worry about. Some of the local dealers, when they were approached with the option to get down or lay down, they chose war. People like Capone from Southwest and Craig Haynes from Uptown. And Capone would actually end up shooting Bucky in a dispute after Bucky confronted him over owing money to one of Bucky's associates. It said that he shot Bucky in the back, but of course Bucky survived. And not too long after that, Capone would be shot multiple times by JBM hitmen, but Capone was able to survive this attack. Craig Haynes would lose his initial battle with the JBM. They were able to take over his territory in uptown Philly, forcing him down to South Philly, but he had family out there, and he also knew of other independent drug dealers who hated the JBM. There, they were able to form up a team with enough muscle to go head-to-head with the JBM, and bodies began to drop on both sides. Multiple members of Craig Haynes' crew would be gunned down by JBM hitmen in gangland-style murders, but even though the JBM was damn near somewhat of a superpower, they too suffered casualties. Multiple JBM members were gunned down as well. And even though certain crews like Capone's and Craig Haynes could put up somewhat of a fight, others didn't have a chance against the force that was the JBM. It was a well-known hustler by the name of Albert A-Train Reagan. Him and his whole squad, they were wiped out in about the span of 1 month. And a well-known Philadelphia underworld boss by the name of Mark Lesby would be shot and killed in front of his home by a JBM enforcer named Anthony Big Tone Reed. But you didn't have to be a part of the drug wars to become a casualty. There's a story of a teenage boy by the name of Michael Waters, who one day was playing with his friends on the corner, throwing snowballs, and one of those snowballs hit a truck, and inside of that truck was a JBM hitman by the name of Anthony Big Tone Reed. He had a U-turn and began to speed down the street towards the teens. He pulled up on the corner, they all started to run, and he started letting off shots, and that's when Michael Waters was hit and killed. JBM enforcer Christopher Dirty Black Laster and his crew would open fire on the South Philly crew that were rivals, and in this shootout, they hit a woman by the name of Sylvia Stinson, but she was just wounded. Unfortunately, it was a man by the name of Willie Bowman who lost his life, and he was just an innocent man. There's also the story of one of the JBM leaders, Brian Moochie Thornton, getting into a road rage incident in North Philadelphia with a man by the name of Greg Jackson. And it's said during the altercation, Moochie's driver, a man by the name of Eric Little Hawk Watkins, got out of the vehicle and began to viciously pistol whip Greg Jackson. And while he was beating him, he looked over to Moochie and said, "Joe, you want me to kill him?" And Moochie gave him a head nod and said, "Go ahead." And he was shot multiple times and killed in front of his wife. The JBM was running the city with an iron fist, and they ain't have no mercy. And Bucky's Southwest crew were known to be some of the most ruthless. But the Southwest JBM faction were always viewed as pretty boys by the other JBM crews from around the city. But it's said that they were really putting in that work, getting up on their rivals and doing them dirty. Just so happened they were doing it while wearing gator boots and designer clothes. And the JBM was also in business with the Mafia, the Philadelphia Mafia, a man by the name of Joey Skinny Joe Merlino. They were definitely plugged in, and the JBM was raking in millions. The boss, Aaron Jones, he ran it like a Fortune 500 company, but a series of events would occur that would bring down the JBM empire. Money, greed, jealousy over women, drug addiction, and the need for absolute power would prove to be the demise. Now, this was the 1980s, and cocaine was sweeping the nation, and it had millions of Americans hooked. And certain JBM members would fall victim to that addiction. And some members also had an affinity for another type of drug, known today in popular culture as lean, something that has been popularized over the past 20 years in urban culture, from 3-6 Mafia to the Houston rap scene, all the way up to Future. But it's been synonymous with Philadelphia culture since the late 70s, and the JBM was doing it in the 80s.
Generally on the streets, a drug organization lasts about 4 years. You know, they get together. Once they start making money, that's when the feuds start. They're short on the money, turning the money in for the drugs that are sold. The drugs go up their noses.
And another issue that the JBM would have would be the violence. All of the bodies bought media coverage, and with media coverage, that gets politicians interested, and politicians pass laws, and that brings down the heat. And after a broad daylight shooting in front of City Hall, that was it. Law enforcement wanted the JBM off the streets for good. FBI, DEA, ATF, all of the alphabet boys came together with one mission: to take down the JBM. And with the increased attention from law enforcement meant more people being arrested, more people going to prison, and also cooperating. And this would cause paranoia to set in, and multiple members of the crew would be killed just on a suspicion that they could be an informant. And that was the case with a man by the name of Daryl Woods, who worked for Bucky's right-hand man Frog as a distributor, but he was arrested. And while in police custody, it's alleged that he agreed to start giving up information on the JBM, and this will cause the crew to send a hitman his way. Anthony Big Tone Reed caught up the Daryl Woods in the Richard Allen housing projects in a stairwell with his friend Neil Wilkerson. Daryl Woods would be shot 10 times and paralyzed from the waist down. Neil Wilkerson would be shot multiple times as well, but he wouldn't survive the attack. And even though Aaron Jones was the boss of the whole crew and had a hit team at his disposal whenever he wanted someone taken care of, he didn't mind getting his hands dirty himself. An independent drug dealer by the name of Richard Isaac was confronted by Aaron Jones and his right-hand man Black Sam, and pretty much told to get down or lay down. When he refused the offer, he was shot 10 times and paralyzed. Aaron Jones would also put in work against his top rival, Craig Haynes, when he caught his lieutenant, a man by the name of Terrence Goss, and he shot him multiple times. He survived the attack, but this enraged Craig Haynes, and that very same day, he set out to kill members of the JBM. Craig Haynes would receive a tip that Aaron Jones had been staying at the Tobin's Inn, and he actually was. But Aaron Jones would exit the building just 1 minute before Craig Haynes showed up with his crew of hitmen, but somebody in the crew thought they still seen Aaron Jones inside, and they opened fire, but it wasn't Aaron Jones, it was an innocent bystander. A man by the name of Donald Branch was shot multiple times in a case of mistaken identity, and this situation would get a lot of news coverage, a lot of media coverage, and it would be bad for business for both Aaron Jones and Craig Haynes, contributing to both of their downfalls. Richard Isaac, the man that Aaron Jones shot 10 times, paralyzing him, had came back to testify against him and Black Sam, but that was the least of Aaron's worries. He had family problems, and what I mean by that is Aaron Jones was married, and his brother-in-law was an FBI agent, and once all of the bodies started dropping and the different law enforcement agencies got involved, they went to his brother-in-law and asked him to work from the inside to gather information on the JBM, and he agreed. And once Aaron Jones and Black Sam were arrested on multiple charges, it left a huge void in the JBM, and Aaron had to appoint a new acting boss, and he had two choices for the job. Leroy Bucky Davis was option number one. He knew how to hustle, he had charisma, everybody loved Bucky. But it was a little bit of friction between Bucky's crew and a fellow JBM honcho by the name of Brian Moochie Thornton. And as a way to avoid any conflict, Aaron Jones chose Moochie as his successor. He knew Bucky's demeanor. He knew he was a cool dude. He didn't really care like that. But he knew if he would have gave all of the power to Bucky, Moochie would have definitely felt the way. So he thought this right here would ease the tension. But unfortunately, he was wrong. The JBM would try to stand tall and stand together with all of the craziness going on, with law enforcement lurking, feds around, members going to jail, members getting murdered. They had a big group meeting so they could have a show of solidarity. And during this meeting, Bucky got up and he spoke to everybody, a great deal of people. And he told them, JBM, we gonna always be on top. We ain't going nowhere. The JBM is forever. But when he left this meeting, he confided in his good friend, D. And he told him, man, like, you know what I just said in there ain't true. And his friend was just like, what you mean it ain't true? And Buck looked at him and said, man, some of us gonna get locked up, and some of us just ain't gonna make it. The JBM crew was now fractured. They used to greet each other with a big hug, followed by the words family. But now they weren't greeting each other at all, and self-preservation was in full gear, and it was every crew and every man for theirself. And with his mentors, Aaron Jones and Black Sam being locked up, Bucky would have to deal directly with Brian Moochie Thornton, a person who he had a lot of beef with in the past. And since he was now in control of the cocaine distribution, he began to short Bucky's Southwest crew. They already had a love-hate type of relationship, but now it was leaning towards more hate. Buck would step to Moochie about shorting his Southwest crew and how could he get more work and what was going on, but they would just give him the runaround, pretty much just play him off. And eventually Buck got tired of it, and he had made his own connections during his time in the game, so he had a way he could go around the JBM and make his own money because he was always a hustler. And this upset acting JBM boss, Brian Moochie Thornton, it said that he began to go down to Southwest and apply pressure to different people in Bucky's crew, trying to intimidate him. And it said that him and Bucky also had words.
Some dudes came to the city, like, came down here, Southwest, Moochie, like, who is you? You know, dudes thought they was bigger than them. You can't be bigger than him out here. You bigger than him when you at. You ain't bigger than him out here. So you don't get the respect. So then when the nigga start riding around, you know, putting his intimidation moves on other youngins or whatever, you know, and Buck said something to me, you know, now them dudes here, they can't stand it.
It was a lot going on in Bucky's life. And on top of that, he began to feel the pressure from the streets. People close to him said that they seen a change in him. He went from being an extrovert, superstar that everybody loved on Front Street, shining, to want to be more secluded, off to himself. He never wanted to seem like he was lacking. Buck would approach his cousin, a man named James Anderson, aka J-Mo, who was also a member of the JBM, and he asked him to watch his back on an all-day basis. And his cousin was just like, yeah, I can watch your back, but what's going on, man? Like, why you need me to do that all day? And Buck really wouldn't give him an answer. So J-Mo just held it down. Wherever Buck went for the most part, J-Mo was there. If Buck was in a room with a female, J-Mo would be waiting outside, making sure everything was good. Paranoia had begun to set in for Buck. He had experienced the dreams of the streets and everything that had to offer. But now, he was experiencing the nightmares. And on Mother's Day, May 13th, 1990, Buck would be hanging out with his boy D. They would hit up a pool hall called Billy Bob's on 40th and Spruce. And while they was there, Buck was like at a frantic pace, playing pool, going super fast, knocking in all of the balls. And one of the old heads that was in the pool hall just looked over to Buck and said, yo, slow down, young man, you rushing. You gonna rush your whole damn life away. And he said Buck just looked up at the old head like, man, what the hell you talking about, man? I'm gonna live forever. I don't know what you talking about. I'm gonna live forever. And after leaving the pool hall, they headed over to Buck's granny's crib to show her some love for Mother's Day. Then they went to Buck's mom's house and gave her some flowers. But while he was there, Buck got a page, and he headed out. He told D he would get with him later. And as he was leaving out, D looked outside the window from upstairs, and right before Buck was getting in his car, he turned around like he knew he would be there and just threw up a peace sign and said, "Love you, bro." And Buck drove off. But that next morning at 2:30 a.m., as Bucky was entering a house on Creighton Street, accompanied by a young lady, Buck was shot multiple times by an unknown gunman. The woman he was with got into the car with the gunman, drove away, and was never seen again. Bucky's death would send shockwaves through Southwest Philly, and a lot of people wanted revenge. And tensions would rise even higher at his funeral when a person showed up who a lot of people felt shouldn't have been there, Brian Moochie Thornton. A lot of the Southwest JBM members were pointing the finger at him for taking the life of their leader. And they weren't the only ones that felt that way. Bucky's mentors and JBM bosses, Aaron Jones and Black Sam, also felt that Moochie had something to do with Bucky's death. And it's alleged that they devised a plan to get back at him. Now, he was locked up not too long after Bucky was murdered, so they really couldn't get to him like that, but they could get to his family. And it said that they sent JBM hitman to kill a fellow JBM member, Bruce Kennedy, who was Moochie's cousin. Now, there are other theories and thoughts of what exactly happened to Bucky and why he was murdered, but what most people can agree upon who was around during those times is that whatever had Buck murdered, it had something to do with jealousy.
I heard it was jealousy, and then I also heard it was supposed to be like a major debt. You know what I mean? But it was a lot of rumors. I'm inclined to go with the jealousy part. You know what I mean? Somebody like Lil Buck.
Buck's right-hand man, Rodney Frog Carson, would take over as the acting boss of the Southwest JBM, but the problems that Buck had, Rodney was having the same problems. He wasn't able to get no work. They was kind of trying to punk the Southwest faction of the JBM. And not only that, after he took over, he really just made himself a target for the feds. He ended up getting arrested. And for a second, he stood tall. But once he got behind those prison walls, he knew he wasn't built for it. And he called up them people, told them, "Hey, come get me." And he struck a deal that sent a lot of the head people of the JBM to prison for life. The JBM enforcers and hitmen would also receive long prison sentences. Some even received the death penalty. A lot of people from the team were going down, including the original leader, James Cole. Now, he left the JBM in 1987 once he seen too many bodies starting to drop. He didn't want no parts of it and went on living a somewhat normal life, but Rodney Frog Carson still gave up enough information to have him convicted and sent away to prison for life. And lower-ranking members of the JBM would go on to spend decades of their lives locked away, incarcerated. The empire had fallen. Rodney Frog Carson would enter witness protection, but it's known that he would later become a pastor, and he actually wrote a book about his time in the JBM, the Junior Black Mafia. It comes a time in life where you have to choose a path, and that path will determine your future and what you will become. And Buck could have became one of the most legendary boxers in history, an absolute legend with fights that are talked about to this day. But unfortunately, we'll never know due to the street life. It's been said at Bucky's funeral, as his friends were grieving and crying, that his mother, Miss Davis, walked over to him and told him not to cry. Everything was okay now because she no longer had to stay up at night worrying about her son, wondering if he would ever make it home. Now she knows. Now she's at peace. And that's the story of the JBM and Leroy Bucky Davis. And he was only 22 years old when he died, man. Rest in peace.